fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome to the Bullvine Podcast, where we deliver the dairy industry's most progressive insights and challenge conventional thinking that's holding your operation back. I'm your host, and this is the podcast for dairy farmers, industry professionals, and anyone who refuses to accept "that's how we've always done it" as an answer. Today's episode is going to ruin your Memorial Day weekend, but it might just save your farm. We're diving deep into one of agriculture's most predictable disasters, the annual Memorial Day milk dumping crisis that's costing dairy farmers millions, while processors shrug their shoulders and blame market volatility. Here's what most people don't understand. Every single Memorial Day weekend, while Americans fire up their grills expecting abundant dairy products, dairy farmers across the nation watch their life's work literally flow down the drain. We're talking about millions of gallons of perfectly good milk being dumped because processors apparently can't master the basic art of predicting what people want to eat during a 3-day weekend. Sound ridiculous? It is, and it's been happening for decades. But here's the question nobody in the industry wants to ask. Why are we still accepting this annual disaster as inevitable when the technology exists to fix it right now? In today's episode, we're exposing the systemic failures behind Memorial Day milk dumping, from antiquated forecasting methods that belong in the 1950s to processing bottlenecks that turn predictable biological peaks into financial bloodbaths. More importantly, we're going to give you the tools to fight back and demand better from your cooperative. If you're tired of subsidizing processor incompetence through your milk check, this episode is for you. Let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a topic that, well, unfortunately hits close to home for far too many in the dairy world, especially this time of year.
Yeah, that annual frustrating thing with milk dumping around Memorial Day.
Exactly. It's a challenge we see reports on every spring.
And for this deep dive, we've really dug into material from a source called Why Memorial Day Kills Dairy Farms.
Yeah.
It lays out some pretty stark arguments about why, at least from its perspective, this keeps happening.
Right. Why this predictable event seems to lead to milk being discarded, year after year.
And this document, it doesn't just call it an inconvenience.
No, it really frames it as a systemic failure. Uses the term predictable disaster, actually.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to really get into the weeds of this source material.
Understand the arguments it's making, look at the numbers it presents.
And see why, according to this viewpoint, the dairy industry seems kind of stuck in this loop, managing the seasonal surplus.
Think of this as getting a shortcut to understanding the why behind those dump reports you might see.
Or maybe even experienced firsthand, unfortunately. We're looking at what this source claims are the systemic failures.
And the potential paths forward it suggests. It really tries to pull back the curtain on some operational and structural issues it believes are, well, being ignored.
Okay, so where does the source start its argument?
It kicks off with what it calls the spring flush reality check.
Right, and the core idea there is pretty fundamental dairy science. Stuff every farmer listening knows.
Yeah, the source even suggests it apparently escapes our processing giants, which is quite a statement.
It is, but it's about that predictable surge, March to May, when cows hit their peak production.
The source really emphasizes this isn't some mystery. It's basic bovine biology, documented way longer than modern herd books.
And it uses the 2024 numbers to back this up. Notes that U.S. milk production, February 24, jumped 2.4% over Feb 23.
Reaching 17.4 billion pounds. Even factoring in the leap year, that's significant seasonal pressure.
But the deeper point this source makes is that this biological reality, the spring flush, inherently creates these predictable, 6-7% surges over fall production.
Regardless of the overall annual numbers.
Exactly. Cows are just doing what generations of genetics programmed them to do, capitalize on spring for max yield.
And with the U.S. herd around 9.34 million head as of April 24.
The sheer volume produced during this peak period, the source argues, just overwhelms processing capacity designed for average daily volumes.
So the source wants you to grasp that this concentration of production in spring causes the dumping crisis.
Even if total annual production is flat or maybe even down slightly.
It paints it as this predictable biological peak catching processors off guard year after year.
Like a first-time farmer surprised that calves need colostrum. That's a pretty sharp analogy they use.
It really is, and it quotes Professor Jared Hutchins from Illinois, capturing the farmer's view.
Yeah, if your buyer says they have enough, you can't go to your cows and say, hey girls, stop producing now.
Right. The brutal reality, as the document puts it, is dairy farmers are locked into a biological cycle.
Unlike a corn farmer or a feedlot operator who might have more flexibility.
Your cows definitely don't check the CME report before milking time, do they?
Not likely. So the source then pivots to ask why the burden for this predictability falls so heavily on the farmer, not the processors.
Which Ludic into a section it sharply titles the $47 million smokescreen.
Yeah, it pushes back hard against what it calls industry spin, around a $47 million Memorial Day loss figure that was apparently floating around.
And the core insight there is that the figure didn't actually come from milk dumping at all?
No. The source points out that number came from the USDA suddenly ending local food purchase assistance funding in California. Totally unrelated.
So the source uses that to suggest the sector is so fragile financially
that processors might use unrelated funding cuts as a kind of distraction from their own operational issues. That's the claim.
Follow the money, but double check where it actually came from.
Exactly. The source says the real dumping numbers tell a more disturbing story. During peak periods, U.S. farmers are reportedly forced to dump up to 3.7 million gallons daily.
Daily, wow. The source calculates that's like dumping the entire daily output of about 370 average-sized dairies.
It's a huge number. And it gets specific, citing regional examples. Last year, upper Midwest farmers apparently dumping up to 350,000 gallons a day during the flush.
And anticipating a repeat this past Memorial Day weekend.
The math it presents for a typical farm, maybe 8.1 gallons per cow per day.
Means their whole day's work, maybe 1,120 standard milk jugs just poured out because plants were full.
Plants that, the source argues, were operating at capacity but couldn't handle a surge they knew was coming.
So the source poses that question. If we can predict calving dates months out, forecast feeds needs.
Why can't processors handle a surge that happens every single spring?
Which transitions into what it calls real farmers, real fury, the human cost of corporate failure.
And here it highlights reactions. Mitch Thompson quoted, watching his milk dumped. A real kick in the shorts.
Which the source translates from Minnesota nice to absolutely infuriating.
And you can understand why. He's shipping around 70,000 pounds daily of quality milk.
The result of intense management, breeding, nutrition.
And haulers pick it up only to dump it in a field because regional capacity was maxed out. That's the scenario described.
It also cites Sarah Schmidt from AMPI, confirming that during peak periods, milk from member farms regularly exceeds processing and marketing capacity.
The source uses another dairy analogy here.
Yeah.
Like having a perfect breeding program, heifers freshening perfectly.
Only to find the maternity barns full, nowhere to put them.
Yeah. And the 2024 spring flush, according to this source, really highlighted the crisis.
Processing bottlenecks, forcing dumping, even with billions in new capacity supposedly coming online in 2025.
Right. The source argues that even that $8 billion investment still won't address seasonal surge management.
Which, it claims, makes the structural problems even more obvious.
The question it raises is why this level of what it calls operational incompetence is tolerated from the companies farmers rely on.
That leads into the section Financial Bloodbath Behind Federal Band-Aids.
Arguing this crisis happens against a backdrop of chronically negative dairy economics.
The source states that over the past decade, average dairy farm net income was negative in all but 1 year.
Wow. The analogy used is running a breeding program where only 1 bull in 10 actually improves the herd. That's not good.
Not sustainable. And it points to the COVID period as a stark example. Class I prices collapsing.
From $19.01 per hundredweight in Jan 2020 down to $11.42 by June.
This source calculates that's like losing $760 in revenue per cow annually. Huge hit.
In Pennsylvania alone, potential monthly losses cited at $25.2 million, nearly $40,000 per farm.
The source then digs into how the FMMO system handles dumping.
Right, the federal milk marketing orders. When milk's dumped, it gets pooled at the lowest class price.
Effectively spreading the financial hit across all producers in that order.
And it quotes NC State Extension saying, this FMMO draw provides only nominal financial assistance. Doesn't make anyone whole.
The analogy is sharp, like a neighbor's mastitis outbreak hitting your milk check because you're in the same co-op.
The source's point. Everyone pays for these systemic failures, but the system itself isn't fixed.
And the math that should enrage you, according to this document,
Is losing 6 to 8 eighths per hundredweight when your milk gets pooled at Class 4 prices, maybe 11 to 12.
instead of potentially getting Class I prices, say 18, 20.
For a 1,000 cow herd, 70 pounds per cow daily. That's a daily revenue loss of $4,200 to $5,600 during dumping events.
The question it asks is why farmers are effectively subsidizing processor incompetence through our own milk checks. Pretty direct.
Very direct. That analysis then leads into what the source calls the perfect storm. 4 systemic failures that guarantee crisis.
So beyond just blaming forecasting, it identifies 4 interconnected vulnerabilities.
That, in its view, turn these seasonal surges into annual disasters. Systemic design flaws, it argues.
Okay, what's the first one?
Failure 1. The perishability trap. Obvious point, but critical. Raw milk isn't corn or beans.
Right, it's got that biological countdown timer. Maybe 72 hours from cow to processing before quality drops.
Creates distressed inventory. When the spring flush spikes production 6-7%, that clock becomes a loaded gun, as the source puts it.
Farmers racing bacterial counts, while their corn farming neighbor can just wait for better prices.
Exactly. Second failure, processing capacity, the rigid bottleneck.
The source claims most plants run at 85-95% capacity normally.
Leaving virtually no surge capability.
The analogy is running your parlor at max throughput every single day. One hiccup and you're overwhelmed.
A typical 2 million pound facility might only have 200,000, 300,000 pounds of surge capacity.
Which the source says is less than the daily production of 30 large farms. That buffer gets wiped out fast during the flush.
And what the source finds even more infuriating is that processors know exactly when the spring flush will hit.
It's not a surprise hurricane. It's as predictable as calving dates.
Yet the claim is infrastructure is consistently built for average volumes, not peaks.
Citing 2024 again, forced dumping in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin co-ops diverting milk out of state at high cost.
Regional price discounts of 2 to 33 Lars per hundredweight due to local oversupply, all presented as evidence of this structural issue.
Okay, what's failure number 3?
The school closure demand crater. Schools are a big chunk of fluid milk use, maybe 7-10% regionally.
And they shut down en masse right around Memorial Day.
It's not complicated forecasting, the source says. It's a recurring calendar event.
But it feels like processors treat it like surprise weather. That's the implication.
Yeah. Memorial Day weekend doesn't just cut school demand, it eliminates it for 3-4 days.
Creating an immediate demand crater that processors somehow forget to account for, according to the source.
All while production is hitting its absolute peak.
Makes sense. And the 4th systemic issue.
Transportation and logistics. The invisible choke point.
So even if you could process it and had demand, you might not be able to move it.
That's the argument. Moving 6-7% more milk strains transport networks. Milk hauling operates on just-in-time scheduling with minimal excess capacity.
Routes are optimized for average volumes. Spike production, and suddenly transport is the bottleneck.
A 2024 example cited. Wisconsin farms with processing available maybe 200 miles away.
But couldn't get trucks because haulers were maxed out, resulting directly in dumping.
The source asks why co-ops aren't investing in surge transport capacity like they might invest in surge storage.
Okay, so that's a pretty bleak picture of the problems identified by the source. What about solutions?
Well, the document's view is summarized under technology solutions. Innovation exists, adoption doesn't.
The core idea, while dairy's dumping milk using old methods.
Other sectors, even within ag, have revolutionized forecasting and supply chain tech.
Companies like Milk Movement get mentioned specifically, offering platforms with better forecasting, real-time tracking.
That the source claims are specifically designed to reduce dumped milk. Calls it DHI testing for your supply chain.
That's a good analogy for this audience.
And the scale is significant. Milk Movement reportedly managing over 30 billion pounds annually, like 15% of the U.S. market.
Working with 2,500 farms, over 5,000 users, including big Fortune 100 companies.
AI-driven forecasting is discussed too. analyzing historical data, weather, market trends, holidays, generating precise predictions.
Reports cited suggest AI can cut food waste up to 30%, optimize supply chains, reduce spoilage by 50%.
The source's analogy here, like moving from visual heat detection to activity monitors, the technology exists to improve accuracy dramatically.
Dynamic pricing also comes up as a potential tool.
Yeah, the idea of responding to supply and demand in real time, compared to having a dynamic feed purchasing program that adjusts automatically.
AI-driven dynamic pricing lets retailers adjust prices based on current costs, demand, market conditions, moving away from static pricing.
Some grocers, the source says, are already exploring this, offering discounts for products near expiration.
Which is directly relevant to managing perishable surplus milk at the retail end.
Right. The tech exists in retail ag. The rules could be adapted.
The source's big question here is, why aren't we demanding the sophistication from our processors? Why settle for outdated systems?
Good question. Shifting slightly, the source looks at what forward-thinking cooperatives are actually doing. Spoiler, not enough.
Suggests some progressive co-ops aren't just waiting around, acting like farmers who adopted robotic milkers before their neighbors figured out what a VMS system was.
USDA funding gets a mention, the Dairy Business Innovation Initiatives, DBI, $11.04 million in 24.
Wisconsin's DBIA got $3.45 million for the Midwest.
And the program offers grants. Dairy business builders up to $100 for small medium ops, and industry impact grants from $50K to $250K for innovative ideas.
But here's the source's critique.
Yeah, the critical point is that these programs, while good, focus more on product development and marketing than addressing fundamental forecasting and surplus management challenges.
The analogy: investing heavily in genetics but ignoring herd nutrition. Solving part of the problem, missing the core issue driving dumping.
What's needed, according to this source, are co-ops actively exploring regional milk supply balancing.
Like sharing of breeding services across farms, maybe?
That kind of thinking.
Yeah.
Plus strategic investments in flexible processing facilities.
Ones that can shift between products easily, like farms adapt barns for different needs.
And establishing real-time data collaboration between processors and retailers.
Similar to how progressive farms share production data internally or with consultants.
The harsh reality check, as the source puts it, is most co-ops still operate like they're marketing commodity corn instead of a highly perishable product.
Okay, what about policy? The source discusses the policy vacuum, subsidizing failure instead of preventing it.
Right. It argues that current FMMO rules for pooling dumped milk at the lowest price are just reactive.
They distribute losses after they happen, sharply compared to a herd health protocol that only treats sick cows, doesn't prevent disease.
The USDA's milk loss program is mentioned, compensates for weather disasters.
But not for these systemic processing or forecasting failures, as the source points out.
So we have programs for unpredictable floods and hurricanes, but nothing specifically for this annual predictable crisis.
Framed as a fundamental policy failure, like crop insurance covering hail, but not predictable drought in a drought-prone area.
The uncomfortable question posed: why are taxpayers and farmers, in its view, subsidizing processor incompetence instead of demanding actual solutions through policy?
Heavy stuff. The source then brings it back right to the farm level. What this crisis means for your bottom line.
The argument: even if your farm hasn't directly dumped milk, these events still hit your wallet.
How so?
The source contends that spring flush dumping adds to overall market oversupply, depressing prices for all milk pooled through Class 3 and 4.
The relatable analogy again. One farm's high SCC affecting the whole bulk tank quality or price. Systemic failures impact everyone financially.
For farms already on thin margins, thinner than optimal body condition scores, as the source puts it.
These dumping events accelerate consolidation and farm exits.
Even if you don't dump, the source suggests you're likely paying through reduced spring prices, increased market volatility affecting contracts.
A competitive disadvantage if your region lacks flexibility, and higher co-op marketing costs spread across members.
The brutal truth, according to this document: every gallon dumped is money stolen from your milk check.
Wow. But it doesn't just leave it there, right? It looks at positive examples.
Yes, under the innovation that's already happening, why aren't you part of it? Points out, smart farmers aren't just waiting.
Some investing in on-farm processing cheese, yogurt for flexibility during surplus times.
Others developing direct marketing relationships, bypassing traditional bottlenecks.
Like farms marketing breeding stock directly instead of through auction. Makes sense.
Aggressive operations, the source says, are using real-time production monitoring for early surge warnings.
Exploring alternative outlets like ingredient manufacturing, creating value-added products to absorb peaks.
Leveraging direct marketing to maybe capture premiums when commodity prices are low due to dumping.
The source's point. The tech and market opportunities exist for farmers to take some control.
Directly asking, so what's your excuse for not exploring these options?
Oof. Leads to the conclusion. Bottom line, stop accepting the unacceptable.
Yeah, the concluding argument is powerful. Memorial Day dumping isn't an act of God. It's framed as a management failure accepted for too long.
Like tolerating high SEC because that's just dairy farming.
This collision of predictable biology and what it calls antiquated methods is bankrupting farms and destroying value.
And the solutions, the source says, are already here. More analogies.
AI forecasting is like genomic evaluations for market prediction, dynamic pricing like automated feeding systems responding to cow needs, flexible infrastructure like modern freestalls adaptable to group sizes.
But the source is clear. Change requires farmers demanding it.
Processors investing in modernizing. Policymakers recognizing predictable crises need proactive solutions, not just reactive band-aids.
Looking ahead, it poses that question. Memorial Day 2026, 365 days away. Dump milk again or fix the system.
And it lays out your move, the 5-point action plan for farmers to refuse the status quo.
Okay, what are the 5 points?
First, challenge your cooperative's forecasting transparency. Demand their accuracy rates during the spring flush. If they can't provide them, ask why not.
Second,
push for real-time data sharing agreements with processors, like sharing DHI data. Get rid of the black box decision-making. Make info flow transparently.
Third, explore DBI grant opportunities, specifically for alternative marketing or value-added processing to manage peaks. Notes Builder grant applications are accepted regularly.
Makes sense. Fourth,
demand investment in flexible processing capacity from your co-op. Capacity designed for peaks, not just averages, compares it again to farmers investing in adaptable facilities.
And fifth, directly connect with technology providers like Milk Movement. Notes they already manage 15% of the market, reportedly cutting costs for clients dealing with these issues.
The source's strong conclusion. The power to change starts with informed farmers refusing to accept that's how we've always done it.
Yeah, it finishes with a direct call. Stop subsidizing processor incompetence with your milk check. Demand better. Your farm's survival depends on it.
And the immediate action step it suggests.
Simply ask your co-op, what's your forecasting accuracy rate during spring flush, and what are you doing to improve it?
The source contends their answer, or lack thereof, tells you everything about their seriousness in fixing this predictable crisis.
So, okay, pulling back from the source itself, what does this deep dive into why Memorial Day kills dairy farms really boil down to?
Well, it certainly paints a challenging picture, very critical of how the annual spring flush meets processing and logistics limits.
The source just hammers home again and again that this isn't a surprise. It frames it as predictable biology hitting outdated, rigid systems.
A systemic failure built into the structure, in its view, not some random event you just endure.
Right. We've covered the source's points on the predictability of the flush itself.
The big financial impact beyond just the dumped milk, the pooling mechanics, price depression.
We looked at its arguments about the key systemic failures it identifies. Perishability, rigid capacity, the school demand drop, transport constraints.
And we explored its perspective on tech solutions like AI forecasting and real-time data.
Contrasted with its critique of current industry and policy responses as, well, not enough, or maybe misdirected.
Ultimately, this document presents a really clear, urgent call to action aimed squarely at farmers.
Urging them to challenge the status quo, demand transparency, push for investment in modern solutions, AI, flexible infrastructure from their co-ops, and the wider industry.
And here's where it gets interesting, right? That final question it leaves us with.
Yeah, looking ahead, Memorial Day 2026 is coming. Are you going to dump milk again? Or will you be part of fixing the system?
It really leaves us with a thought for you, the listener, to consider after hearing all this, reflecting on the issues raised in this deep dive.
What specific actionable step, maybe even a small one, will you take based on this information to push for change in your part of the dairy industry?
That's a wrap on today's episode of the Bovine Podcast. If this episode made you angry, good. That anger is the first step toward demanding the changes our industry desperately needs. Memorial Day 2026 is 365 days away. The question isn't whether the spring flush will happen again. It's whether you're going to let processors dump your milk while acting surprised about predictable biological realities. Here's your homework. Before next week, ask your cooperative one simple question. What's your forecasting accuracy rate during spring flush, and what are you doing to improve it? Their answer will tell you everything you need to know about whether they're part of the solution or part of the problem. Remember, the power to change this broken system starts with informed farmers who refuse to accept the status quo. Stop subsidizing processor incompetence. Demand better. Your farm's survival depends on it. Thanks for listening to the Bovine Podcast. For more cutting-edge dairy industry insights that challenge conventional thinking, visit us at www.thebovine.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with other farmers who are ready to stop accepting "that's how we've always done it" as an answer. Until next time, keep challenging the industry to do better. Your cows, your bank account, and the future of dairy farming depend on it. This has been the Bovine Podcast. We'll see you next time.